Make a basic beat in Bitwig.
Here I am in a new project. I've got an instrument track. On this instrument track I have what's called a device chain. A device chain produces and processes signals. It's called DSP, digital signal processing. In a new empty project, it starts out with two different tracks. One is an instrument track as indicated by this little piano style keyboard icon. The other is an audio track as indicated by this little waveform icon. We're not going to mess with audio today. We're just going to start with a basic notes track, a MIDI track. And the way this works is you produce a signal to go into the track, a note signal. You produce notes like this. This is a keyboard over here. And you can also use caps lock keyboard on your physical computer keyboard as well. If you hit X, you can go up an octave. Hit Z to go down octaves. And then use the other keys to actually trigger the notes. But right now, nothing is actually playing out of the track because we don't have a sound source. Let's add a sound source to the device chain. You can tell that notes are coming into the track by this little yellow square. It flashes whenever I play notes. You can see that with this as well. But I'm triggering it with my computer keyboard. So we get that little yellow flashing square. That indicates the notes are coming into the track, but in order for that to make it sound, we need to add a device. So there's lots of different kinds of devices. This is a good one to start with. And now the notes coming in here, being processed by this device and producing an output audio signal. That audio signal, when it reaches the end of this device chain, it goes into the track fader section. That is going to control the volume using this fader. So if I hold down a note, I can actually change the volume using this fader. And there's other effects and things you can do with that. But for now, it's enough to know that you've got a fader to control volume, a pan to make it go left and right, double click to center it again. And that's basically how a track works. The signal flows in from the left, goes into a device, and then audio flows to the right. But there's other cool things you can do, like, for example, we could add a distortion effect. And now that audio comes out of this device, goes into this distortion device, and then flows out here to the track fader section, and finally out to the master. It's important to understand how these device chains work because they're at the very heart of how Bitwig works. Let's add a beat. I'm going to create a new track, and I'm going to find a drum machine. Now this drum machine is a very, very powerful device that lets you map individual notes to entire device chains. Let's start by loading up on the C1 pad a kick. We can create here an E kick, which is a device designed for producing kick signals. Now, you can audition that pad by pressing play here, and you'll notice as I press keys on my keyboard, I'm bringing notes into the track, but the way the drum machine works is it actually filters the notes so that they only go to the device chain when the note matches. So this kick is on the C1 pad, so I need to bring down my octave. There we go. So I play other notes and I trigger other pads, but only that C1 is going to trigger my kick. Okay? When that note comes in, it kicks off this device chain. And this is a full arbitrary device chain. So underneath this blue hat here, it's like I guess it might be a Bitwig. You click this, and we can add other special effects. I mean, there's lots of things you could add. Something on a kick, might be a delay. Wow. Now we got a delay on the kick. Cool. So let's add another essential sound, a snare. Okay. Now one thing you'll notice here is that the devices are shown here in a little preview mode so you can see what's on the pad. And this kit contains the delay. So we get that delayed signal. If I bring up the amount a little bit, you can hear it really clearly. But the snare does not get that delay. And that's because the snare, if you click the pad to open its chain, the snare has a different signal processing chain. The signal starts from the left and flows to the right, but oops, there's no delay there. So if we want that delay to be applied to everything, we can simply move it out of this chain and move it after the entire drum machine. So now if we collapse that signal processing path for the kick, we see just this drum machine as a whole. You can also double click a device to collapse it. And we can see that after the drum machine as a whole, we get the delay device. So now we also hear that snare delayed. All right. So another essential element that we want is a hat. So now we got something on the high end. And this is also coming out of the entire drum machine and feeding into the delay. Now, let's say we want a delay on the kick and the hat, but we don't want it on the snare. Okay, if we want to do that, what we could do is we could bring this delay into, well, I guess not on the snare. Let's bring that back out. Not on the snare. We can bring it into the hat. There we go. And now we can also copy this device. You can Control C to copy that as a shortcut, but you have to have it selected. And then you go here and then you can paste it. Oh, let's just right click. There. And now the kick gets a delay. The hat gets a delay because it's got its own delay. And the snare is clean. Now let's say we want the hats to have a little bit different effect. We can actually manipulate its device, and the device on the kick stays the same. You can hear how those delay patterns are different. Cool. Now on the snare, let's say we want to thicken that up a little bit. Well, let's see what kind of presets we've got for this. If we select a device, if we select the snare presets, there it is. Play the note corresponding to the snare, which is C#1. And you don't even have to actually finally select. You don't even have to finally commit this snare before you can preview. Let's just take something simple like that. Okay, so now we've got a drum machine with a few different sounds that we can use to build a beat. If we select a device chain, we can turn off some of the processes in that chain so that we can get a cleaner sound. I'm turning off the delays here so that we can hear the clean sounds. I'll double click the arranger to create a clip, select it, and hit Control L to loop this region. And now it's just an empty clip, so we hear nothing but silence. And it just repeats. When it gets to the right edge of the loop region, it cycles back to the left. And silence is actually a very important element in music. Double click the clip, go in here, make sure the clip tab is selected. The track editing is for multiple clips, which we don't want to do today. Let's just focus on one clip for now. And here we are. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. We can sequence in a sound. And now every time the playhead hits that, it'll play that sound. Add another. Double click, add another. And there's a basic beat. It's called the 4 on the floor. just the kicks on each beat. Now, these numbers up here at the top tell you what bar and what beat is at that time. So this is the first bar, first beat, first bar, second beat, first bar, third beat, first bar, fourth beat. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If that's a little too fast, you can change the tempo, which is telling you how many beats per minute, by clicking and dragging that, so we can make it slower, or we can speed it way up. And a typical range is anywhere from like 70 to 140 or something. A lot of my music tends to be in the range of the 90s or maybe 100. All right. So there's a basic beat. Snares very often go on the second and fourth beat. And hi-hats give some accent in between, kind of a counterplay between the beats. And this is a very cliche beat pattern. If you want to make it a little bit more interesting, you can add notes and kind of break the symmetry a little bit. And that sends a signal that the whole measure is ending and beginning to repeat. All right. So that's an extremely basic beat. If we go back and put the effects on, hit D, without caps lock, hit D to activate the device chain. Come back in here. Let's see what it sounds like if we turn that delay back on. Hey, now there's a little bit of a groove. You can mess with the timing of the delay. The kick should probably not do too much crazy stuff. You want to keep that simple. Hats, you can go a little more crazy. Kind of just mess with that. And every little tweak to the timing is going to affect the groove. Kind of bring that down so it's not so intense. Another essential element to groove is the velocity. If you hit this little note expressions icon here, you can edit the velocity of things. If you bring down the velocity, it won't be as accented. If we bring a velocity way up, it'll sound more sharp. Bring this down, bring that down. Now you can tell that this hi-hat is accented, and that kind of gives emphasis to a particular time in the cycle of the beat. Now, let's go back to the device chain and add one more element. I'm kind of hearing another hi-hat here. Let's just add a hat. But instead of the E hat, let's try a different hat. Let's try a sample this time. Because these are arbitrary device chains, we can load any kind of device into a pad. So if we click that and go up here to samples, start searching for hats, and we can look within the classic drum machines. Find something we like. That's a nice little hat. All right. Let's see what it sounds like. Okay. This is a sampler device, which is a very different kind of device than these E-hats. These are basically percussion synthesizer devices, and this sampler is using an audio signal, which we'll talk about in another tutorial, but for now you can think of it as a pre-captured sound, and it just plays that exact sound. There's a lot of things you can do to mess with it, but the sampler is a very deep instrument that we can dive into later. For now, it's enough to know that we have a sampler on here, and we can use this in our clip. If you want to give it a name instead of something super generic like sampler, you can come here and select the pad, go to the inspector and give it a name like closed hat. All right. So here we have our closed hat, and let's just give these a regular pattern here. Let's just fill it in. So I'm going to select this and I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate this time region. So this time region that I have selected is going to be duplicated. Hit Control D again. Again, it's duplicated. And again. But this is a little too regular. So let's back that up a little bit. And before we do a duplication, let's at least change the velocities a bit. Let's just, yeah, like let that ramp down. And then select that. Whoop. Another way to do it is just to click the pad itself, that drum lane, and then hit Control D, Control D, Control D. And now you can see it repeated that pattern just for those hats. And there it is. Now, if you want to hear what the pattern is for just one particular element, there's a neat way to do that. You just go into the drum machine and solo that pad. Now, these other pads are being activated, but you can't hear them. Only this one. If you want to mute that, now you can hear what it sounds like without this one pad. Demute it. Let's take out the snares and bring them back. That snare is a little bit weak. We can make it stronger by adding a reverb. Reverb is a common effect to add to a snare. There, and that just thickened it right up. Getting the reverb just right on a snare is a whole art form that can really affect the groove of the music, especially for dance music. But if you tone down this main knob here just to control how much time the reverb takes, that's a very effective way. And you can hear what it sounds like with and without by turning the device off. And back on. There, let's just thicken it up a little bit. Bring in the mix a bit more and it'll sound much more reverbed. Make it a little bit more subtle. All right, so there we have a very basic beat. With this polysynth bass, we can create a bass line. Double click, create a clip, and let's start putting some notes in. All right, so start simple. Let's see what it sounds like when we move it. You'll get a very different feel depending on where you place the notes within a cycle of a beat and within the cycle of the entire measure. You'll get a very different feel. So that's why step sequencing is a fun art, because you can just hear it and experiment and find your groove. I'm sticking within the grid here, but a very important element of groove is getting off of that grid. If you break off of that grid, it totally changes the feel, and that's essential to music as well. But the 16th note grid is a good place to start. Now that one was too long because I had a longer note there. If I just double click, or if I just single click and drag, I can create another note. Now these two notes are overlapping a little bit. We can make them shorter by selecting them, and if you hold shift you can get precise editing. If you don't hold shift, things will tend to snap, but if you hold shift you can get more precise editing to separate those a little bit. Another cool thing with bass is if you sustain it, you get a stronger sound. Sticking to octaves is also a powerful technique with bass. Shift and press arrow keys up or down, you can move by an entire octave. Another cool thing that you can do is you can select multiple notes and copy those to somewhere else. It's a lot of fun to go into a sound, hit D to bring up the device chain, and mess with the parameters to change the sound. Just experiment with the sound to see what sounds cool. And while we're in here, let's do something that Bitwig is great for, which is called modulation. Let's say you're messing around with a pattern here, and it sounds good to be going up and down like that with a particular parameter, and you want that to happen automatically. There are several different ways you can do it, but one of my favorites, it's very simple, is to use modulation. Click this little arrow here, looks kind of like a plug, and these are the modulators. We're going to add a modulator. You can tell that clicking this plus will add a modulator because down here it shows what clicking will do. It says click add modulator. Click that, click the LFO, and now we have an LFO device. You can expand and collapse that modulator device, and we can choose the time base for modulation. If you wanted to go every bar, select bar. And right now you can see where the modulation value is here. And the reason it keeps resetting is because of this trigger mode is on note. If you set it to sync, then you'll have a regular pattern in the overall project. Click that to arm the modulation and apply it to the parameter you want by clicking and dragging. And now you can see the value going up and down as this LFO goes up and down. That's just the very, very basics of modulation, just to make the bass line a little bit more interesting. You can see that other modulations are applied on this preset. That filter cutoff frequency is also a very essential parameter to control. Let's add a different LFO for that one. Actually, let's add an entirely different kind of LFO. You can go to the classic LFO, expand that, and let's try a ramp pattern. That's a little too much. Let's bring it down. You notice how I click to arm and also can click to disarm. Another way to disarm is to press escape on the keyboard. Alright, so now we got this ramp happening, but it's not quite in the pattern that we want. So let's tune that. If you right click here, you can see all the modulations that are being applied to this. They may be getting cut off on the screen, but we can X out the ones that we don't want. There. Now this ramp is being applied, but it's going too fast. Bring up the speed. can sync it to the time of the project. Put it on half notes there. Quarter notes. It's fun to experiment with this kind of thing. Change it so that it's unipolar, and that way it will only add instead of adding and subtracting. You can see that the range of the motion changes between unipolar and bipolar. Things below the middle are negative, things above the middle are positive in bipolar. But if you hit that to deactivate bipolar, then it becomes a unipolar signal between 0 in the middle and 1 at the top. That sounds kind of cool. You can also adjust the curve, which is affecting the basic shape. And that can be a very important element to control the groove. There we go. A very basic bass line. Once you've got a very basic groove going, you can use that as a foundation to create more musically interesting parts. So one thing I like to do is just click the lower right corner of a clip, drag it out, and that'll make it loop. We can do that also with the drums. And now we can expand also the loop region so that we get a full 4 bars here. 1, 2, 3, 4 bars. Let's add a new track for a bit of texture. Double click here. That's a nice shortcut to add a track with some content. And let's restrict to the polysynth device. And under presets, let's find a nice pad sound. Okay, you can preview different sounds. And if you hit space, you can go ahead and play this in the context of the track. Sounds okay. We'll put that in there. Sequencing in the music is a very essential element of building a track. We can start. Trying to get that in. If you don't want to get into recording and you want to keep your edits very precise, what you can do is just watch that playhead and remember where it is that you play your notes as you just mess around. So for example, what I just did was I played this note here, then I played this note, and then I played this note, and I'll let that sustain a bit longer. And I think I probably played something like that with this going high instead of low. You can single arrow key to move it by a single semitone. Whoops, I did all that shifted. We want to watch the time up here. There we go. Let's shorten these notes. Actually, we can shorten all the notes by selecting all with Control A and bringing it down like that. Move this one earlier. Change this to 1/8 notes. Bring this in between like that. And you can see how these little edits really affect the feel of the music. So this is the place to really get into some experimentation and try out different patterns and rhythms. But I'm trying to keep this very simple. Let's just add a little bit more interest. Let's bring up this. Bring these notes down a little bit because they're not really accented. Let's accent that one a bit more. Now, Bitwig has a really cool capability to edit micro pitch. And it's not just micro pitch, it's the full pitch range that you want to work with. You can bend way up or way down. So let's see that in action. Take down the velocity and expressions. And let's try bending this long note here. So you click there to create a point for the pitch, and click again to create another note. And at this point in time, we want to start bending that up. Let's bend it up by 12 semitones, which is a full octave. And we'll end on that. Let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Let's bend it a little bit faster, and we can change the rate of change of the pitch bend itself by alt clicking and dragging to affect this shape. Actually, we could select both of these points and shift them in time. You can also use the arrow. I think this one might sound neat if we actually start it high and bend it down. That'll offer some contrast to this pitch bend up using a pitch bend down. Let's bend it very quickly down by changing this shape. Let's zoom in a little bit. Control Z, undo that. Alt click, and there we go. Let's bring that up. There, that sounds pretty cool. One more element. Let's add something nice and short and melodic. Again, starting from simple presets. Let's do something chippy. There we go. Let's bring up the device chain here. Add a note effects. Let's bring in an arpeggiator. All right, let's talk about this arpeggiator for a moment. What this is going to do is it's going to take a note that we play in, and then it's going to break it down into repeating elements, creating a pattern. If you play on the computer keyboard just one note, whoops, I need my caps lock key on, just one note, it'll just repeat that. Let's bring up the device chain again. And if you play two notes, it will alternate between them. There we go, that's nice and harmonic. And creating a pattern in the arpeggiator becomes a way of producing a melody with minimal inputs. So you can just play a couple of notes or then shift to different notes and just basically play chords, and it will arpeggiate or break those chords down into individual notes, producing a simple melody. All right, so for now, let's just do that very simple thing with the C and the G. All right. And drag those out. Whoops. Take that off. And drag that out. So now we have a full menu. Let's go ahead and loop that for now so we can continue to hear it. And we'll make this go to 2 octaves. Starting very simple here. Let's bring the velocity down, bring the gate length down. And you can create patterns with the gates. The gate says how long the note should play. You can make notes disappear entirely by bringing that all the way down. If you want to change how fast the notes go, affect the time here. It's called the base rate. You can tell what this is by looking down here at the bottom. If you mouse over something, it'll show you what that is, and it'll show you what various actions will do. If you drag it, you can adjust the value. Control-click to type the value, and so on. Even better, let's stop that for a moment. While we're talking about this, let's take away the keyboard. If you click this and press F1, you get the help for this device. This is a really wonderful feature of Bitwig that can help you learn a lot of things about a lot of different devices very quickly. If you play, you can see that it's actually working with your device. This is the device that is actually playing. I can bring the gate length up, or I can bring it way back down. And you can hear the effects directly. And just read all this text. It looks like a lot on some of them, but it's all worth reading. To understand what you're doing is extremely valuable in creating music, or any kind of art really. Just understanding what you're doing will free you to be creative. Alright, that's enough for now. A very simple melody and beat in Bitwig. If we want to tone down that arpeggiator a little bit, yeah, just kind of put that more in the background. If we go here, we can add some interesting effects. One of my favorites is the Bitwig A, which is a bit crushing device. You can make it sound a little more retro. Just change the parameters here until it sounds pretty cool. Now, one last little tip while we're in here. It's worth knowing that parameters that are in frequencies in Bitwig can usually be set by triple clicking and typing, and instead of giving a unit like kilohertz, you can actually give it a pitch. So if I want to give this C5 a named pitch, then it can be in perfect tune with my track. I know that my bass is in C and my melody and stuff is centered around C, so being able to tune that effect frequency onto C notes is valuable, because it will not stand out and create dissonance with other elements of the music. So I think probably we want more like a C7 here. Maybe even C6. Triple clicking is not the easiest technique, but it works. There we go. Bring that back up a little bit now. Just a beginning. Enjoy.